Good morning and welcome to another interview in the Anfield Leadership Series interview program. Today we're excited to be speaking with Brennan Carson. Thank you for joining us today, Brennan.
Thanks, Barry.
Brennan is the portfolio manager and head of solution wealth management. Brennan, why don't you give us a little bit of an overview of your current role, company, and background for the audience?
We are a relatively new portfolio management, investment, and wealth advisory firm. I think our greatest quality that stands out is that we're an independent firm. So as people know, the industry in wealth management is dominated really by the banks, by mutual fund companies, by life insurance companies. So we stand out a little bit that we are an independent firm, and we work with families, individuals, institutional accounts, some pensions, and some corporate accounts, really providing both investment and wealth management services.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Let's jump into it, shall we?
Sure.
All right. I'd like to start with having you describe to the audience, what does the word leadership mean to you?
For me, leadership is really about responsibility. It's really about understanding and embracing the responsibility you have to lead. And I know that's, that may be sort of, intuitive by the word itself. But I've always been a great believer that leadership is a far more difficult skill to build and acquire than most people think. And I think really when you and I have talked, Barry, and I know what you're trying to do through Anfield is really building leadership, because I don't think it comes naturally. Right. I think people think about leadership as, well, I'm at the top of the chain, so I have that responsibility. But the responsibility actually drives down. I think it drives down that your responsibility is to your people, it's to your customers, it's to the community. It's really about fostering success, both measurably, but also intangibly. And I think the responsibility is a burden. And some people either choose to be intimidated or affected negatively by that burden. But I think if you look at it the other way, it's an opportunity really to rise, embrace that responsibility, and affect change.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. What are some of the important values that you demonstrate as a leader?
Well, I have to admit, I'm a little old school. I still believe the most important leadership characteristic I have is to lead by example. I still believe that hard work, commitment, honesty, integrity matter the most. I think that leadership falls like an apple from a tree. I think all those looking up to a leadership role are looking first and foremost at someone that they would like to emulate, somebody that is going to inspire them to be better. And so I think you really have to understand that you have to be the best person in the room. And I don't mean best in terms of smartest or best in terms of having all the answers, but I think you have to embrace the characteristics that are the best. And again, it goes back to a complete commitment to what you're doing and a caring for the community around you that you are trying to lead. I think in another way, in terms of leadership values, I think a lot about transparency. Closed doors don't work in leadership anymore. I think we've all learned that the role and the effectiveness as a leader has evolved, just as we as a business community, as a culture have evolved over the years. So transparency really in two ways, I think. One is operational transparency. So as you are giving guidance, as you are developing a plan for your team, you have to provide transparency on why those decisions are made and what our objectives are, so that it's a really clear understanding. So people don't just buy into the output, they buy into the input. They really understand those processes and decision-making to understand why you achieved a certain decision and a direction that you've chosen to go. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a transparency on emotion. as well. That you understand how, as a leader, you have an emotional spectrum like everybody else. There's fear, there's determination, there's trepidation, there are good days, there are bad days. And so really it's a reflection of the people that you work with. They are going through the same emotional arc that you are as a leader. And I think if you provide transparency that you have good days and you have bad days and you make good decisions and you make bad decisions, I think people are going to connect with you better. And then the final thing for me is really just about flexibility and being dynamic. There's the classic quote, the last thing you should ever say as a leader is, we're going to do it because that's the way we've always done it in the past. And I think leaders need to accept that the road is not straight, and that in order to effectively lead, we have to be able to navigate turns in the road.
Excellent. I don't know whether you have or you haven't, but if you've had any formal leadership training in your career, can you tell us a little bit about that, and which specifically was most beneficial to you and why?
I went through a really, really interesting leadership training program about 15 years ago, where they did, there's obviously different, Myers-Briggs, but it was basically a brain analysis. And it was a brain analysis of leadership, but it was also brain analysis of the members of your team. And so we went back and we took these results to sort of understand, okay, are you more analytical? Are you more emotional? Are you more organizational? Really trying to understand that. So there were two things that I really took away from that, Barry. Number one is we all have strengths, but we all have weaknesses. There are parts of our brain which are more higher functioning with certain skills, and there are parts of our brain where we are less functioning. And I think it's really important as a leader to understand where your strengths are and where your weaknesses are, because that brings humility and honesty into the conversation. But I think the other part of it is team building and understanding that it is your responsibility, comes back to that word again, as a leader, to understand your team and understand how to put the right people in the right place for success. Nothing drives motivation more than success. And this isn't about success at a corporate level.
Right.
We made more money, or we sold more trinkets, or we won awards. This is really about individual empowerment success. And so by doing that analysis, really understanding you've got to take the role of team builder and put those people in a place where it really optimizes their strengths. They're going to get the most satisfaction out of that opportunity. And in turn, they're going to bring more value to their teammates. So right people, right responsibilities, orchestrated in the right way. So again, leadership not about how your position is viewed, but from a team building point of view.
No, that's good. And it certainly replicates some of the tools that we use here at Anfield. We tend to use the DISC evaluation for that exact same thing.
Right.
Not only for the leader, but also for the team dynamic. That's phase one of our actual 90-day workshop. So great to hear that type of approach resonated with you and you learned a lot from it.
Absolutely.
If I were to talk to your team and ask them what sort of leader you were, how would they describe you?
I really believe in passion capital. I use that expression all the time. And don't get me wrong, sometimes passion capital can get you in trouble. We passion capitalists can be optimistic and sometimes a little bit impetuous. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I think it really demonstrates that you care, that it matters to you. And again, matters isn't just about bottom line. It's a more holistic approach towards what you do. So passion is something I try to bring to everything that I do, not just through a leadership in a business environment. I volunteer as a youth sports coach. I bring passion to that role. I'm a husband and a parent of 3 kids. I believe I bring passion to an enthusiasm to everything I do in that leadership type of role. So that's number one. I think the second thing is an open-mindedness, really being a good listener and understanding, again, going back to this concept that life doesn't go in a straight line, and that you need to be open-minded and open-hearted enough to understand that. And so really that's what I want anybody working with me and as part of my team to really feel, that I'm driven to really help foster success going forward in a multidisciplinary way.
Right. No one can go it alone per se.
Absolutely.
So how would you then define your communication style, and what do you think are some of the benefits to your team of that approach?
I think communication really is I come from sort of a rules-based background. I mean, my colleagues and I are kind of math nerds at it all. I mean, we're sort of data-oriented, rules-focused. And I think communication is as much of a formula as anything else. And really, I sort of think of it as 4 steps. Communication starts with listening.
Mm-hmm.
Listening is the key, not just for leadership roles, but for any communication to be successful. The ears have to be the first thing that starts good communication. Number 2 is understanding, because what you hear isn't necessarily what may be the truth. So as good a listener as you can be. And my sister, who also, she and I talk leadership responsibilities and styles quite a bit. She is one of those people that always comes back to, okay, Barry, you said this. This is what I'm hearing. Do I understand you correctly? Making sure that listening is actually active and responsive.
Right.
The third thing is analysis. So you've understood what's being said. Now, what does that mean? Really trying to translate communication into action, into next steps, into where do we go from here, from what I'm hearing. And then finally, communication is then speaking, responding to what you've heard, what you've processed, in order to communicate back. And I think there have been there's a bit of a bifurcation in leadership coaching, where leadership can be so much about confidence and saying what you believe and pushing down your strategy and your approach on people. And I think that's the end result of good communication. I think you come back with that commitment to a plan only after you have been a good listener and processed what you're talking about. So communication really, it's a circular, ongoing, active process. Again, regardless of whether you're in a leadership role or not.
Well, I thank you for that answer. And as you're giving it, I'm reflecting and listening intently. But more importantly, those 4 steps that you describe are the essence behind the journey of becoming a reflective versus a reflexive leader.
Right.
It happens to be the journey as part of our 90-day workshop as well. The challenge is, what's the secret sauce to getting people to actually learn and apply it? So I thank you for having that similar thought process. A little bit of a fun question. What would you say is your greatest strength or superpower, if you will?
My greatest strength and superpower is humility. I think I know myself extremely well. I think people who are blind to, again, strengths or weaknesses, sometimes get lost in their misconception of who they are and what they do and the impact or role that they play. I often say that's leadership is something that can be innate. You can find 16-year-old kids who lead a hockey team, who simply lead because people are naturally drawn to them. Mm-hmm. But at 16 years old, they don't know why people are drawn to them.
Right.
They don't have the emotional intelligence enough to really understand that they simply have a dynamic personality that people are drawn to. Whereas with time, for those of us who have been around the block a few times, I think it's really understanding where you can add value and where you don't. And so those tacit understandings of who you are and really what you're good at, but also what you're not good at. I think I know myself well, and I think that allows me to know where I belong and know where I don't.
No, that's a great insight. And as I'm listening, I think about the number of people who have had tremendous measurable or tangible result success in their career. And they look over and go, well, why haven't I been promoted? Or why haven't I got that job? Or why is that person leading to that level and I'm not? And it's that step across the bridge, if you will, to understanding that they're lacking that self-awareness.
Mm-hmm.
They're lacking that, not necessarily humility as you describe your superpower, as it best describes Brennan, but the recognition that I've hit a glass ceiling and there's got to be some reason as to why. I'm going to seek out some feedback and input to recognize what it is and then make that commitment, no matter what the feedback, to begin that sort of not last step, but what I describe as a very important step of that journey towards leadership.
Right.
So what would you say you observe as the fundamental difference between leaders and managers?
You know, it's a fine line. And again, this goes back to the comment that I made near the beginning. I think leadership is a very difficult characteristic to embrace and to do well. There are lots of people who can manage, but it's a smaller group who can lead. So to me, being a leader means you are driving change, you are driving growth. And again, that isn't necessarily a financial growth. That is the growth of your team, the growth of skills developing, and you're inspiring. So it's, again, part of that notion of responsibility. Because look, leaders have to be courageous. They have to step out on the diving board, and they have to realize that it's not always going to be perfect. And you have to have the courage to walk out there and to be exposed and to be vulnerable, but to take a chance that you are doing what is best for, again, the team, the organization, and the culture.
Yeah, I think
So,
sorry, I was going to say there's several times we've all jumped off the board and reflected and going, okay, that's a pretty good entry. I'll give myself a 9. And other times we completely belly flop and recognize that we got something else to learn from it.
well, and there are those leaders that they belly flop and then they come up and they blame everybody else, right? Which is, the first thing you got to do is eat humble pie and say, all right, we made a mistake. Let's try again. So for me, when you flip from leader to manager, and it's interesting the way people give titles, in large corporations, you're the managing director, you're the lead of this, titles aside, for me, a manager is somebody who takes that leadership, takes that catalyst for change, that decision, and implements and monitors.
Right.
So you're not responsible for driving change. You're being responsible for implementing and facilitating change.
Right. Exactly.
And so you are not really taking on that role of being that inspirational guide for your team. You are really accepting the role that your job then is to take the architect design and start building the house. And so that to me is the defining characteristic. And again, you go back to this idea of understanding where people have strengths and weaknesses. Those combination of people who are both creative and analytical make great leaders. Right. But the people who are great organizational make great managers.
No, that's a good point. Absolutely. I would agree with that. So wrapping up and thinking to, the benefit or value of the series for those that have this aspiration and maybe, you know, have either hit the glass ceiling or they're younger in their careers and they are that 16-year-old hockey player and now in their 20s and have had some beginning recognition of there's something in there about me that others have told me. What advice would you offer to those people looking to become more effective in their career?
I think you have to understand what you're trying to achieve, because being a leader just for the sake of being a leader is not actually an objective.
Right.
I think that's more of an ego. That's more of a play on, you know, or I want to be a leader because I'm going to get paid more. Or I'm going to get a leader because I'm, you know, more people are going to look up to me. I think it's really important, if you're aspiring to either grow your leadership skills or achieve a higher leadership position, you really have to understand what is motivating you to want to get to that place. And again, for some, it may be financial or ego related, and there's no negative to that, but you have to accept that that's what's motivating you to do it. I think for me personally, I think a lot about legacy. I think about the fact that my leadership role as a coach, as a parent, as a leadership in a corporate environment, I like to believe that I'm fostering the next generation to be better, smarter, more successful than I was.
Yeah.
And so you really, again, you have to understand yourself. You have to understand why you aspire to a leadership role, and then fulfill that obligation every day.
No, that's excellent. Yeah, I think about the journey that I've been on, and I'm sure you've been on, similar yet different, right? Every journey is different, but I think people who have had success in leadership have asked that question of others. You know, what advice would you give? But more importantly, or as importantly, they've had the self-awareness to listen to the response and actually invest in themselves and do something about it.
Yeah.
Great. Well, listen, I'd like to thank Brennan for joining us here today. I think we're able to learn a lot about your leadership style and especially how others would benefit from the advice you've offered and the journey that you've undertaken. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Barry, for having me.
Yeah, so for the audience, these interviews are available on our YouTube channel. Go to YouTube and search Anfield Leadership Series. Join us next time for another insightful interview on the challenging subject of effective leadership. Thank you all for watching.